The 19th century was certain there was a passage across the top of the world, a shortcut through the ice, from one ocean to the other. All it needed was the right men and the right machines to go and take it. 129 men, two of the most advanced ships ever built by the Royal Navy, 3 years of food in the hold, a library of 1,000 books. In May of 1845, they sailed north to finish the map of the world. This was everything the British Empire was certain it could not lose. 134 men had left England that spring. 5 were sent home sick before the real ice began. That left 129. 129 men went into the Arctic. The number that ever came back out was 0. England did not think of this as a gamble. The passage was a formality, a ribbon waiting to be cut. The papers had them home within 2 years, the map finished. No expedition had ever been so certain of coming back. In late July, 2 whaling ships met them in Baffin Bay. The crews chatted, traded news, and wished them luck. Then the ice opened, and the ships went through. They were the last Europeans ever to see the expedition alive. The man in command was Sir John Franklin, 59 years old, a national hero, and famous for a reason that should have given someone pause. Because Franklin's fame rested on an earlier expedition, one that had gone catastrophically and then somehow gloriously wrong. 20 years before, leading a party overland through this same Arctic, he had run his men completely out of food. They survived, barely, by boiling and eating their own leather boots. That is not a figure of speech. They ate their boots. England did not find this alarming. England found it heroic. A man who ate his boots and came home was exactly the sort you sent to take the ice. So they gave him a nickname for it: the man who ate his boots. And they meant it sincerely as a compliment. Then there was the food. 3 years of it packed into the hold, and almost all of it came from a single, rushed, cut-price contract. 8,000 tins, awarded to the cheapest bidder in London, a man whose price came in suspiciously, temptingly low. Nobody thought to ask why. The contract was signed 7 weeks before the ships sailed. 8,000 tins. 7 weeks to seal them all. To close a tin, you run a bead of solder around the lid. Done well, it seals the food away from the world. Done in a hurry, by the thousand, it does something else. The solder in these tins was thick and sloppy and rushed. It ran down the inside of the cans like candle wax. And solder, in 1845, was mostly lead. So the lead went quietly into the food. Day after day, meal after meal, a slow, accumulating dose. And the men, eating heartily, tasted nothing wrong at all. For a while, that was the whole of it. A hidden flaw, eaten slowly, in a hold full of confidence. For a full year, nothing went visibly, obviously wrong. The expedition did the ordinary, unremarkable, patient thing. It settled in to wait out the long polar winter. They wintered at a small, flat scrap of rock called Beechy Island. And on Beechy Island, the dying quietly began. On New Year's Day, 1846, a young stoker named John Torrington died. He was 20 years old. He was the first of the 129. 3 days later, a second man died. That April, a third. 3 deaths in a single winter, before the ships were even trapped, before anyone aboard understood there was anything at all to be afraid of. They buried the 3 of them on the frozen beach, side by side in the permafrost. 3 graves, cut into an island at the very top of the world. 4 full years before anyone would come looking for them. And here is the small detail that stays with you long after the rest. The ground on that beach was frozen solid, hard as forged iron. Digging 3 graves in it took the exhausted crew days of brutal labor. There was no reason to bother. No one was watching. They did it anyway. Each man was washed and wrapped in a clean sewn shroud and laid out with his arms arranged just so. It was one of the last acts of order these men would ever manage together. The last careful, decent thing, performed just before the care itself ran out for good. Then, in September of 1846, the pack ice closed around both ships and gripped them tight. Not for a season, not to be waited out. The ice took them, and it did not intend to give them back. They were locked in place off the coast of a low, featureless, wind-scoured island called King William Island. And there, the two ships simply stopped. The two most advanced ships in the Royal Navy would never move under their own power again. The following June, aboard a ship frozen fast in the ice, Sir John Franklin died. The great commander, the man who ate his boots, gone, with his men still trapped and the passage still unfound. Command passed to his second, a quiet, capable Irishman named Francis Crozier. A genuinely competent officer handed the single most hopeless situation in the history of the Navy. And here, before it gets worse, I have to offer you one small, strange, grim mercy in the middle of all of this. The man whose name this entire disaster carries, the name on every map and memorial, did not see the worst of it. Franklin died in June of 1847, before the ships were abandoned, before the true horror had even started. He had, you might say, the good manners to go first. 2 years later, a search party picking its way along that same coast found a note, folded and tucked for safekeeping inside a small stone cairn. It was a standard Royal Navy form, the pre-printed kind you fill out and seal in a bottle and throw into the sea. And in the margin of that form, an officer had written, in a neat and confident hand, 2 words: "All well." Except the same form had been used a second time, written on again, later, by a different hand. 11 months after the first note, someone had come back to the same page and scrawled around its edges, sideways, in the little space left over. By then, 24 men were dead, Franklin among them. The ships had been abandoned, and the 105 survivors were, at that moment, marching south across the ice on foot. The complete collapse of the greatest expedition England ever launched fit, in the end, into the margins of one printed form. Read that last part again. They left the ships. They walked away from the 2 warmest, best provisioned, best defended structures for 1,000 miles in any direction. And they did it on purpose. They abandoned the food, the shelter, the libraries, and the heating, and they walked out into the open ice on foot. Their goal was a river far to the south at the edge of the map, Back's Fish River. Over 1,000 kilometers away, at the very edge of the map, across a frozen wilderness with no shelter, no reliable game, and no help coming. On foot, dragging heavy sledges, through a country that had already killed 24 of them without trying. For well over a century afterward, the story told itself very simply and very cleanly. It blamed the lead, leaching quietly out of those rushed and sloppy tins. And it is a tidy story. The rushed contract, the sloppy solder, the poison in the food. It is also only about half true. In recent decades, scientists went back to the bones and to the preserved fingernails and looked again. The deeper killers, it turned out, were slow starvation, tuberculosis, and a diet so poor and so unvaried it had quietly dismantled their immune systems from the inside out. The lead did rise, sharply, but only in their very last weeks. It spiked as their starving bodies began, in effect, to consume themselves for fuel. The famous poison, the neat villain of the whole tidy story, turned out to be as much a symptom of their collapse as it was a cause of it. And then, in 1859, a search party found something stranger than any of it. A ship's boat. A full-sized boat, mounted on a heavy oak sledge, sitting alone. Miles from open water. Miles from the ships. Alone in the very middle of an empty white nowhere. And the boat was pointing back. Back the way the men had come. Toward the ships they had already left. Inside the boat were 2 skeletons, and a careful, deliberate collection of the things the men had chosen to carry to the end. Not the things you would expect. Not the things a starving man drags 1,000 miles. Chocolate, tea, silk handkerchiefs, scented soap, table silver, a stack of books. They had dragged a small library across the ice. They had not, it turned out, dragged nearly enough food. Then, in 1854, a different kind of man came north. Not a Navy officer with a warship, but a lone surveyor named John Rae. Rae did the one thing no British expedition had ever bothered to do. He stopped, and he asked the Inuit. And the Inuit, who had lived on this ice for 1,000 years, told him plainly and exactly what they had seen. A long line of white men, starving, dragging a boat, walking steadily south. And then, later, further along, their bodies, scattered down the coast, wherever they had finally fallen. Rae brought back proof too. Franklin's own medal, monogrammed silver forks sitting incongruously in the snow. And the Inuit had reported one more thing. Rae, being an honest man, wrote it down exactly as he heard it. From the state of the remains, he wrote, "Our wretched countrymen had been driven to the last resource as a means of prolonging existence." For solving the greatest mystery of the age, Rae was paid a reward of £10,000. And for the honest detail he had reported, the truth nobody wanted, John Rae was quietly and thoroughly destroyed. Because England did not want to hear it. And England, as it happened, had a spokesman, the most famous writer alive. Charles Dickens dismissed the Inuit testimony out of hand. Their word, he wrote, was the vague babble of savages. Then he went further. He suggested that the Inuit themselves were the murderers, the cannibals. He blamed the only honest witnesses in the whole affair. Rae never took a word of it back. He also never got his knighthood. The frauds who searched and found nothing were the ones the crown honored. And there the whole matter sat, comfortably, for well over 100 years. The Empire's version, the tidy version, the version that let absolutely everyone sleep at night. Until the bones came back. On King William Island, where the men had fallen and been left, forensic scientists carefully gathered up their scattered remains, and this time somebody looked at the bones closely. And on the bones, they found marks. Fine, deliberate, unmistakable marks. Cut marks, made by blades. These were the marks that finally answered the question this whole story has been asking. How did every one of the 129 die? The scientists went further, because the evidence went further. Some of the bones had been broken open, deliberately, for the marrow inside. It is the final stage, the thing a starving group does only at the very end, when there is nothing else left at all. The men who had once eaten their boots to survive, at the very end, ate each other. I will say nothing more about it than that. The rest you can assemble for yourself. Which means John Rae, the honest man England could not forgive, had been right. Every terrible word of it, completely right. Rae's dismissed report, his talk of the last resource and the kettles, was true in every particular. It took England about 140 years to say so out loud. And then, at last, the ice itself gave the rest back. In 2014, searchers found HMS Erebus. It was resting on the seabed near O'Reilly Island, which is to say exactly where Inuit oral history had always said it would be. 2 years later, they found Terror sitting in a bay that already bore its name. Again, precisely where the Inuit said. A local hunter had remembered a mast sticking up out of the ice years before. He mentioned it. Someone finally listened. It is worth stopping for a moment to add up the whole account, to do the Empire's arithmetic properly. 129 men, 3 full years of provisions, 2 of the finest warships afloat, £10,000 in reward money. Total return on the entire investment? 0. The search for the lost expedition dragged on for a decade and cost more than the expedition itself. It was, financially, the worst market the Empire ever entered. the Empire spent a fortune to conquer a shortcut. The shortcut took everything it had and handed back nothing at all. There is a quiet ending to all of this. 60 years later, a Norwegian named Roald Amundsen simply tried the same passage again. He did not bring 2 warships and a library. He brought 1 small fishing boat and a crew of 6. And instead of trying to conquer the Arctic, he spent 2 winters living among the Netsilik Inuit and learning from them. In 1906, he simply sailed out the far side of the Northwest Passage. The thing an empire and 129 men could not do, 6 quiet men did, just by asking. The passage was never won by the men most certain they could take it. It was won by the one man humble enough to ask the people who already lived there. They were so certain they could take it. In the end, the ice only ever answered one thing. See you next time.